This is the Metropolitan Council Special Committee of the Whole meeting, and this is July 8th, 2024. I'm Charlie Zelli, Chair. Great to see the great turnout we have, and thank you for giving your time for this special meeting. We're here to go into more depth about the Blue Line, but first, I'm assuming that the agenda is approved unless anybody has a strong objection. But we also have minutes to approve from the meeting held June 5th. So is there a motion and a second to approve the minutes? Thank you. Is there a second? Thank you. And any discussion, corrections? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Those minutes are approved. And I'm going to invite Nick Thompson and Nick Landwehr, Kelsey Young, and Nkongo Sigulo here in a minute. We've been talking about getting more information about the Blue Line project for months and months. And of course, there's a number of us who are on various committees, task force, community management committee, and the Transportation Committee. And I think the Transportation Committee just had maybe the most recent series of presentations. So that we're not professing that this is going to be all new news, but it's going to be a lot of new information or more timely information for all of us. And I just think it's important for all of us as a council to be gathering this information together. I will just say a couple of things about what this is. As I said, information sharing, and a couple of things it's not. It's information sharing because I think it's important for us not just to get pieces here and pieces there, but to get it in its whole cloth. And to also know that this is evolving every month, every step. The story develops. We learn more, we hear more, and we expect that to continue the rest of this year and into next year. The important thing to consider, too, is that we're in a process, and I know everybody here believes that we as government need to follow that process. We've just initiated, along with the Federal Transit Administration, the Supplemental Draft Environmental Impact study, which is really very specific about how we can make comments, how we listen to comments, how we gather information about the impacts that this project will have on the community as well as really the whole state. It's really important to consider that this is not a forum for making comments to that impact statement. It will, and I think Nick will give us an opportunity in the presentation to talk about where we are with that. I just want to clarify that this is not a hearing for us to make comments in response to that supplemental draft EIS. But there will be opportunities. The second is that this is not an opportunity for us to make decisions. And I know that's sometimes hard because I had this conversation with my wife, kind of like, wait a minute, let's just hear this out. And we're in a, let's hear this out. The reason we're not, I'm not saying anybody can make their own personal evaluations, but we're not voting, we're not determining, because we're also legally, but I think from the beginning, in a process where we're learning about what impacts are, what the efficiencies are, what this particular project will bring. So I'm going to ask that we suspend, not total judgment, don't suspend our brains, enliven our brains and our curiosity, but we will have not just ample, we will have an opportunity not only for making decisions, but we'll also have an opportunity to kind of learn more. So this is not the only place or only time we're going to learn, but we're going to learn as we go. But this is an important time, and I think we've been promising this like a whole meeting, special meeting, just for us, to get this from the beginning to the end. Having said that, I know some of you would love to stay here till midnight. I am not one of those. I actually think this is a regularly scheduled 2-hour meeting till 6. If you go a little over, I'm not going to be, I don't have to be anywhere. I just want to be respectful of people's time and staff to stick with it, so. Judy?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you for your comments. And to that point, it's a long presentation. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to pre-read it because the presentation itself could take over half of, and we're almost 10 minutes into this meeting. So now we've got an hour and 50 minutes. So I just hope that we can kind of scoot along. Some of us have lived through this longer than others. I'm looking at Barbara and Wolf and Charlie, you and I were back doing light rail stuff.
Way back
but you know, but I think it's just important that we get to the part where the council can ask questions and kind of dig in so that we get the information and understanding that we're looking for and all of this good data that we're getting today.
Great point, and thank you. And I think it's worth kind of talking about this expectation and a little housekeeping first. So Nick and staff, if we can kind of keep, let's keep it moving, because we should try to not spend half the time. We should spend maybe a quarter of the time. And we want most of our time to be about conversation and questions and comments and follow-up. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Did I say everything I need to say? Did I miss anything, Nick? Okay. All right, welcome, thank you. I really appreciate all the efforts that you're doing and particularly on this project.
Chair, council members, thank you for this opportunity to talk tonight. To be efficient, I will be the presenters, but we do have staff here that can help with questions as we get to that phase.
Perfect.
I'm here, Nick Thompson. I am the interim project director for Blue Line Extension and deputy GM capital projects at Metro Transit. So the presentation today is based on information that you have requested in the past, including committee of the whole that we had in May, where we talked about the Transway Advancement Policy and what information you would like to hear. As the chair mentioned, there are no decisions tonight, but we're presenting this in advance of some major decisions, which I will talk about in the schedule related to this project. First of all, I think it's good to put Blue Line Extension in the context of the vision that we are building in the region. This is part of the Metro Transway vision that is embedded within our transportation policy plan and within the plan of the Metropolitan Council. You know, as we look about what we are building, what we have built, we're about halfway through building this vision. We have 4 lines under construction this year currently, and we are opening 3 of those 4 next year. But we have several in the engineering or planning phase, including the Blue Line Extension, which is in FTA parlance is in the engineering phase, but is also sort of in the planning phase as we've went back to change the route. But we envision by maybe 2030 or 2031, we'll have completed this vision and have all of these lines within service to our customers. So now the Blue Line Extension, it's just the basics of this. It's 13.4 miles and proposing 12 new stations. It is an extension of the existing Blue Line that connects with existing Blue Line at Target Field Station. It goes through 4 cities, Minneapolis, Robbinsdale, Crystal, and Brooklyn Park. It's all within Hennepin County. And we are proposing that it runs a service that will run with the same as the existing Blue Line. This is an all-day frequent service, 7 days a week. It is that single-seat ride when it is open, so you can go from Brooklyn Park all the way to Mall of America or the airport. Where we're at in terms of the project itself, we are, as the chair mentioned, the supplemental draft EIS is out for public comment. That public comment will be through August 6th. Municipal consent process is the process that begins after that, and I'll explain that process towards the end of this presentation. There will be an action by the council for that process. Later this fall, early winter, we'll be at a milestone called 60% design. That's where the design is really becoming, the engineering design is becoming much more focused and detailed. It's a major milestone in the design process, with final design occurring late 25, early 26. We could see construction on the current schedule as soon as 2026, with an anticipated opening at the end of 2030. So internally, we call this Blue Line 2.0. It's because this is a project that's been in development for a long time. The original project was 2015 through 2020. We're using an alignment that is shown in yellow here and in the northern third in Brooklyn Park in blue. This was along the old freight rail alignment, and then made a decision in in 2020, after a lot of negotiations with the railroad, that we were not going to be able to secure the right-of-way necessary for that alignment. So we made a pivot to what is now Blue Line 2.0. So we formally transitioned the project to a new route modification. We needed to go through an extensive process, public process, to modify that Blue Line 1.0 route and there were several milestones within that. A lot of different routes were looked at. You see a lot of different colored lines, particularly in Minneapolis, where there was a lot of route options that we needed to determine. Went through a lot of process to get that down to the preferred alignment that we have today. And that final recommendation for the route that we have today was made, and the CMC adopted that in August of 2023. And that's an alignment that goes along at the southern end on the eastern side of I-94, connecting to Target Field. There's a lot of history to this project, as there are to all these Transway projects. The history and the supplemental draft EIS that's out today really started with the publication of the draft EIS in 2014, which means the project was starting up before 2014. But this is probably one of the longest developed projects in the FTA in its capital investment grant program. So this project's been going on a long time. We hear that a lot from the residents that we're planning this in. But we're getting to some major milestones where a project is more in sight to be completed. But there are many steps here, but what the supplemental draft EIS that's out for public comment is based, starting all the way back in 2014, because a portion of that route and some of the impacts studied then are still relevant today. Within the supplemental draft EAS is, as all environmental documents, the purpose and need of this project. I think it's always important to look at the purpose and need of this project and any of these projects to understand why it's being proposed. This is to provide transit service which will satisfy the long-term regional mobility and accessibility for businesses and the traveling public. So it's a regional mobility project. That's what the Metro Vision is about the regional mobility, with, of course, an impact on the corridor itself that you're building within. But as we're building this vision, we're building this into a regional network. So we expect customers that would use the Blue Line extension to be part of our connecting to the rest of our system also. To address this long-term regional need for transit mobility and local accessibility needs while providing efficient travel time, competitive transit service that supports economic development goals of the region and the objectives of both the local government, local community, the regional community, and these projects become statewide in nature due to their scale and the location of the projects and their impact on both our economy and the state's economy. So that is the purpose and need in the draft environmental impact statement. A couple other timelines for where we're at. We've been developing the SDIS since 2022. It's now out for public comment. We've been studying those route options. Later this summer, we begin that municipal consent process. In next year in 26, we get to the supplemental final environmental impact statement and the amended record of decision, hopefully late next spring, and that's where we will have the mitigation defined for the project. Then we are able to, if that record of decision is issued, we can enter the final design for the project, begin the procurement process, and begin application for federal funding. And construction bidding could be as procurement documents available for bidding as soon as early 2026. And then we'd anticipate a 3 to 4 year construction period with the opening towards the end. I also point to the top of this, which I'll get into, is anti-displacement. That is a core part of this project, which we're going to get into a little detail tonight. But that has its own schedule, but it's always concurrent with this project. They are inseparable from the project schedule, but we have a couple different schedules, but we always want to show that there is a community engagement anti-displacement schedule that also goes along with this project in these phases. This year is one of the more important years for this project in terms of a lot of Direction will be given to the project. Some of the decisions and official input on the project is this year. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this year's schedule. We're about halfway through that. The supplemental draft EIS out for public comment. Public hearings are coming up in July. The municipal consent process, we anticipate will conclude in October. So we'll have gotten official public comment from the communities, the 4 cities and the county on the project, and beginning to enter this process for finishing the supplemental final EIS. The Corridor Management Committee has been busy. They meet every month. We have corridor management committees on these transitways, and they have different schedules depending on the phase you are in the project. But because there's so much new information on this project and so much advisory information we need from the Corridor Management Committee, they've been meeting monthly, providing direction to the project as we've gotten through major milestones on the project. We've been releasing new ridership and cost information as we reach major milestones. Tonight I'll release additional new ridership and cost information that coincides with the municipal consent design plans, and then some major milestones related to anti-displacement, which I'll talk about. And since early 2010s, we've been in a public engagement process, and that will continue throughout the year too.
Yep.
Now,
Ryan has one comment.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. Nick, I just want to add one piece that takes us out beyond December too, because I think it's relevant here for the group. So the chair and I were out with our partners in Washington a couple months ago, one of the months a couple ago, and talking about continuing to check in on a project that has been in the queue for a long time in the new starts process, but also has gone through revision, as has been referenced so far. And as a part of that, there is an ask to the FTA to reconsider the overall cost of the project and what the federal share would be, because that got set a project iteration ago. As a part of that conversation, part of what we learned was that that's one of those things where we don't have clarity on exactly when that step would take place, but Q1 of next year was kind of a soft takeaway that I would just say, I wouldn't officially mark it somewhere, but if you were to take this out just a little bit farther, that's a key data point to this project as well that I wanted everyone to hear as we're going through it, because it determines how much is a federal funding would be available for the project relative to what would be required as the non-federal match. And so that's kind of that January, February, March block that falls just off the slide. And I wanted to put that out there because I don't think it's going to show up on a slide, but it matters a great deal to this body as we proceed.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, go ahead, Judy.
Make one point. Thank you for that, Ryan. We could probably get back to that later. And also just for the we in all of this, that's Hennepin County and Met Council, right? So the project originated at Hennepin County. I think you might have mentioned that, but there's still, for the public at large who's listening, when we're talking about we, you might assume it's Met Council, but we still are in partnership with Hennepin County. And that's why, especially to the point that Ryan just made, they're majorly into that piece of it. So
Yeah,
I just wanted to make it clear that Met Council's in process, but this is still very much a Hennepin County project.
And as we are the management and the federal designee, Hennepin County has been our local funding partner.
Thank you. That was a good piece to give.
all right, so we're going to get through a design update. I'm going to start in the northern part, Brooklyn Park, and work down towards Minneapolis. And it's probably a good point to say if you haven't had the opportunity for a tour, we are happy to give you a tour. I'll show you some images of the corridor, but I think there's always tours or great opportunities to actually see what we're building in and the environment we're building in. So what I'll show you tonight is the vision for what we plan to build if we build the proposed design. But it's always good to, we are great opportunities that we can provide individual or custom tours to scale your schedule, and we'd be happy to do that at any time. So you can work with us on aligning a tour. So Brooklyn Park, and this is where history really, we should step back a little bit, is when we stopped the old Alignment 1.0, the project was 90% design. It was basically almost ready for procurement. So in Brooklyn Park, the design really is the same. So that community was strongly engaged in how that would be designed within Brooklyn Park in the original version. And so a lot of the changes and updates to Brooklyn Park have been very minor because they have really set on the design of what station location, what the stations would look like, and the land use. And so not as much engagement has occurred in Brooklyn Park because they've already their design is set from the previous project, and they're very comfortable with the design that was being proposed and continue to be. So this is, the northern third of this is much further along in the engineering design process than the southern 2/3. But Brooklyn Park has 5 stations, and we've gotten the stations designed down to their color scheme, their roof lines, their finishes. Tremendous amount of work has been done on these, and it's ready to go. North of that Oak Grove Parkway, which I'll show, is where the new OMF operating system maintenance facility will be constructed for serving the fleet of this project. That OMF facility here, design is in some vacant land currently. The city has been very open to this location. The property is secured. The design is basically ready. There's some updates we'll need to do for changes in any requirements, architectural requirements or environmental requirements. But this project is well designed at this location at the northern end. If you're familiar with where the Target campus is, this is just north of that location. The project itself will begin with a large park and ride, the Oak Grove Park and Ride Station. This is a station where the size of the park and ride is still to be determined by the modeling, but anywhere from 500 to 900 vehicle spaces anticipated. We will, again, this is just a rendering of the potential of the park and ride design. This is a park and ride that is both for transit development, but also for the development that the city anticipates will occur around this. There's a lot of TOD development that is expected to occur around the station. The land use is already set up for TOD. If you can see the squiggly gray lines around the park and ride structure on this, that's the city's envision of 3 different residential and commercial developments that would occur just within this one block, using parking, some combination of parking that they would be able to build with this and with us for efficient use of parking in this area. So there's a really good vision for this area that the city has already developed and is ready to implement with the project. In terms of station location within Brooklyn Park, a lot of them are center running stations, familiar to Central Corridors, University Green Line, similar to station design like that on the street. In Crystal, one of the major components within Crystal is at the Bass Lake Road interchange. A lot of work and a lot of design work and community work here to kind of understand how we could fit a station within here and a park and ride. There's a lot of traffic within this area too. So the solution that has been developed and supported at the community level is for an interchange to be built at the intersection of these 2 county roads. Hennepin County says this is the first county interchange in their network. That would allow us to have the transit station underneath the interchange here, separate the traffic. We're able to reduce the roadway here from 6 lanes to 4 lanes because of the interchange, and make it a really good pedestrian environment for within where the interchange is on this location. Oops. So the benefits of this interchange are not just for transit. It significantly improves vehicle operations and safety with Bass Lake Road. This grade separation of County Road 81 provides benefits for County Road 81, a major highway in the county system. Much better trail access here. There's significant regional trails. To the upper left of this picture, there's a very large park that is heavily used and accessed by trail users. So they'll be separated from traffic here, so much safer access, both through the light rail, but also to the park and trail access. So just great general transportation multimodal improvements that are occurring with this station. Another look from beneath the station. This would be if you're a customer of the light rail system, accessing the system. The road goes above you, so you're just at grade with where the park and ride is or the trail structure. So really convenient access at this location. In Robbinsdale, again, we anticipate a downtown Robbinsdale station. The downtown station will connect to a park and ride. It has tremendous residential and commercial access that is here. There's a lot of transit connections that we anticipate. There's also a lot of potential development that is occurring around here or anticipated around this station. The lower left corner there is the proposed park and ride location relative to the station. And I'm going to show a couple more pictures, including a video. So just want to orient you where that station is relative to the park and ride structure. And this is the park and ride, the topography of Robbinsdale in this area. There is some topographical changes, and so you'll see that people entering light rail, some of the park and ride, it's multi-level park and ride, but the top level is also at grade with the city street, commercial street behind it. So there's really interesting and good access to both transit and the park and ride and the local community businesses in this area. So if this works, I'll be showing you a video, a simulation of the downtown Robbinsdale on the next click. This is a video we have not shown to anybody, so you're the first users to see this, and this was one we'll be starting to share in the community. It really helps understand, there's been a lot of questions about how this will work within their community, and we think this video is a good representation of that. If you'll notice, you'll see the park and ride and you'll see buses that are circulating. This is a major bus transfer point. We currently have the Hubbard Transit Center nearby that we will be replacing with this. So a major improvement, not just to rail, but to our park and ride users and our customers for bus access and bus connections here will be made by this station. I guess it'll be the next slide. So this is the rendering of where that bus circulation is relative to the station. So this should be a video that starts to play. Maybe I have to click it in. There we go. So this is a simulation of how we anticipate it'll look when constructed in downtown Robbinsdale. There's tremendous pedestrian improvements in Robbinsdale as we connect to this. Also really better local connections to the local road network. Signalization is being improved. A lot of improvements in terms of how traffic will flow through and the pedestrians. There'll be much safer, or there'll be safer pedestrian crossings of this busy highway due to how we're constructing and designing safe places for pedestrians as they cross this. You see the park and ride in the upper right there where the buses will turn around and connect to the station here. So there's 2 stations in Robbinsdale. It's simulations like this that we're able to bring out now because of how far the design is advanced, that I think really helps us. It's hard sometimes for the public to understand how this will change, but how will fit within this city very well within the existing right-of-way. And so it's we envision a real positive change, not just for the light rail, but all the modes and the safe access and control and how transportation works in Robbinsdale and access to the community. So we're hoping that this visualization will help as they go into the city's decisions about municipal consent on this project. The next station down, which borders both Minneapolis and Robbinsdale, the station itself, if you're to draw a municipal boundary for those 2 cities, would go right through the center of the station. So this station serves both. This is also the North Memorial Hospital station. And this is a station that is located within a transportation easement of Hennepin County that is within the Grand Parkway, or the Minneapolis Park System. And so this is the Grand Rounds location. So you can just visualize that this is a complex interchange. Just you look at the trail system within this and the road network within this and fitting a light rail within the system. This has been one of the more complex engineering and engagement approaches that we've had to develop it. But I think we've come out with a solution and that is really probably evolved the most of any of our stations in the past year and a half based on engagement. This is the station that, one of the advantages of the new alignment, this station serves directly North Memorial Hospital. The previous alignment 1.0, there was no good connection to North Memorial Hospital. And so we see this is one of the tremendous advantages of the new route is this ability to serve what is essentially the largest employer in this part of the it's Robbinsdale's largest employer and one of the largest employers of this area of Minneapolis. And so now we'll have a direct station very close to that North Memorial Hospital, but also it's a direct stop. It's a great connection to the park system here too, and also a connection to the community with all the trails and all the residential area around here. There's a really good, we anticipate a lot of ridership from this station, but it is a very complex station that we've done the work. And a year and a half ago, if I were to show you this is a station that would have been, at that point, an elevated station, 3 stories in the air, with a skyway connection to North Memorial Hospital. Through a lot of work and a lot of desire by the community and the cities to try to bring that down to the pedestrian scale of this, we've done a lot of work to come up with a new design that is actually at the grade of the parkway and the roads that serve directly into North Memorial Hospital. We're able to go at the grade below the bridges of County Road 81 here. So tremendous, I think, for many reasons, a much better station from both the transit operations. We don't need to maintain any elevators, we don't have to build a bridge for this. So a much easier to maintain, and we feel a better for accessibility and for our customers, but also much better accessibility for North Memorial and for the park system and the neighborhood itself. So really good improvements here, working with, this is one we've had to really coordinate with Hennepin County with those bridges there, are brand new bridges. And so fitting within that context of that roadway network and that complex trail network has been a challenge, but I think we've come up with a design that is really strongly supported by the neighborhoods. So it's great work that has occurred here. So that sort of is Minneapolis and Robbinsdale Station. Now getting into Minneapolis, tightest right-of-way here. This whole route is on existing right-of-way, but within Minneapolis, very narrow right-of-way on Broadway Avenue. And so this is a point where we looked at a lot of alternatives from splitting the train between 21st and Broadway, having the train on Broadway, but settled through engagement from the community and businesses and the city that the best would be to have the light rail transit way go on 21st Avenue, and that to be a transit and bike only corridor in that section. And then with West Broadway being redesigned in the section where you see West Broadway improvements on this map, to really think of these as both corridors as one transportation corridor. You're split by a block, but that we have to build them both together for both systems to work. And so a lot of work to get to this point. But I think we have a real good design here now that is both safe operations but also fits well within the community here. It will include a new bridge over 94 for 21st for the light rail in this section. And then that section of West Broadway that will be built in parallel with the light rail corridor will be improved also as part of the project. Because of how we're constructing, we do need to reconstruct this section of West Broadway for utility reasons. And so that will become part of the project costs for these about 3 blocks here. But as we do that, there's a separate engagement process to work with the city and the community and the businesses there. How do they envision this new Broadway in this section? So we anticipate that it'll change for the roadway design. They'll change, improve, and retain parking on street. There will still be bus stops on this street, so we're integrating the best experience. Other options being considered are a lot more opportunity for trees. We're able to narrow the roadway so they have more pedestrian space, new sidewalks, and bike facilities. So this part of the West Broadway will also be reconstructed and just be a real strong improvement for that community. And then as we get to the North Loop area of Minneapolis, how we are trying to design how we connect over to the Target Field Station has been one of the more complex routing decisions. But we did finally decide on 10th Avenue configuration of the North Loop. This is kind of a complex drawing, but in the upper left, the big white area is the North Loop, Metro Transit's North Loop bus garage. So we had to fit around in that new garage that has a lot of buses coming in out of that. It's also a busy thoroughfare for serving North Loop, and the only design we could come up with that would work for transit and pedestrians and other needs is to make it a transit mall for the last 3 blocks on the right side of this graphic. And so we are able to serve our North Loop facility for buses and vehicles in that stretch just fine. It won't affect our bus operations in any way. But we are closing 10th to vehicle traffic in those last 3 blocks and making that a transit mall and bike and ped. Similar in nature to the U of M transit mall that we have in location. So it's a good comparable there. But as I'll show in video and slide, is we had to find a new spot for that traffic too. So we'll be creating some new routes within the North Loop community. So here's a visualization of that transit mall. We have been, of course, hearing a lot of concerns from the North Loop neighborhood about how this will impact how they get to their facility and where they live. There's a lot of residential in this area, so we've created this visualization to better explain that transit mall concept. So this starts on Washington Avenue, north of the 10th Avenue Mall. So we are also re-envisioning that Washington Avenue section. This is the transit mall. So really good. You see the trail on the left side, but we maintain really wide sidewalks on both the left and right side of this. As we go through here, street access, crossing it, we do maintain access to all facilities within this area, so we're not cutting off any access to anybody. We may be changing access to a building, but we're not taking away any permanent access to any of the buildings. So there's different uses within here. Salvation Army has a big location. We have some parking ramps. We have some condominiums and some other businesses as you come through here. But this is a visualization that we're starting to show within the community, and I think has gone a long way for people to understand how it will work and get more comfortable with the plan within this area. So in the North Loop area, is to mitigate that traffic impact of closing a through street, one of their few. There's, if you're familiar with the North Loop, it's not the most connected grid, so there's some routing challenges. And in this map, the orange roads that are on this map are new roads that we'll construct with the project to improve traffic flow as we close 10th in that 3 block segment. And so we've been going out in the past several months, engaging property owners in the North Loop community about these access routes, and it seemed real strong, favorable input that we've received to most of the roads here you see in orange. As these would be major improvements just for how traffic and transportation circulates within the North Loop neighborhoods. That orange, the longer orange one that is labeled 8th there is parallel to the Bassett Creek Tunnel that is buried several feet underground there. And that is an area that can't be developed because of the Bassett Creek Tunnel, but can be developed as a roadway and pedestrian way. And so that's a good new connection there that will really alleviate any issues with traffic flow within North Loop if the Blue Line extension is constructed here. So we've, received a lot of public feedback here, and just wanted to highlight a few things that have changed based on engagement. It's always good to reflect on how, if you do engagement through us and provide comments, those are taken to heart. And a lot of our design changes have been made based on engagement we've taken. So in Brooklyn Park, they've done a tremendous amount of work about what those stations would be designed, where they would be, what the land use would be around them, how the design of the stations are really the finishes of the station, what they look like, is all based on community input in that community. In Crystal, there's a lot of work was done about how they access that station and how we can best get the pedestrian access to improve and to have better, for some of these regional trails, connection to their destinations, including their parks. And they recognize that a lot of their residents will use the system by using the park and ride, so they wanted good connections to their park and ride. So we made a lot of changes based on engagement from the city of Crystal and its residents. In Robbinsdale, there's been just a tremendous amount of debate. Where would the stations go in Robbinsdale, with focus on about how do we east-west connect to the stations in the route, and how does their current transportation flow within the city, how can they improve that? So we've made a lot of roadway improvements that will help just the overall flow of people within Robbinsdale, both for transit, but also for pedestrians and cars within that community. And as I mentioned before, that Lowry Station design has changed dramatically based on the input of the community and the cities in Minneapolis and Robbinsdale, really to change our design that we started with the community at a multi-level design and getting it down to the scale that they wanted within their community and where it would be located. And then in Minneapolis, where the most options were, we had a lot of work on what corridor to put this on and where the station should be, and then how the bridges should be designed over 94 and how it could connect the community. So that design is really driven by a community process. I'll touch on environmental. I showed this before, but we're in the supplemental draft EIS stage. It was published on June 14th. Federal Register was published on June 21st. Public comments being accepted through August 6th. I can refer you back to the slides from this June 24th Transportation Committee, where we made a large presentation on the contents of that is at one place, or you can obviously the information in the document itself, but I won't really go back to what we presented there in interest of time. The next steps after that public process, we need to develop the supplemental final EIS that is based on public comments. We need to show what our mitigation plan is for impacts to that, and then get that supported by FTA. FTA will issue the supplemental final EIS, hopefully as soon as May of next year. So anti-displacement, this is what I would think sets Blue Line Extension apart from some of our past projects. This has been an effort that is coordinated in parallel and within the project itself. One of the major concerns we hear from the community on this project is whether it will displace current residents and businesses. And so there was a specific ask that we focus in that as we develop the project, in that has been communicated to us by the cities too, that an effective anti-displacement plan is required as part of their support for this project. And so that effort is somewhat new to a project development like this, but has been a great part of this project. It is being coordinated in part, led by Hennepin County with the council support, but in some sense we're setting it in parallel to the project. So I want to talk about where we're at with that parallel process. Last year, they created kind of a next steps agreement. Many of the next steps have been checked off. There's a regional group that has been convened that we as the council participate in that group. It has all the cities in the county and other members within that group. Applications were taken for that group to have the membership within that. There was a desire, definitely a need, desire expressed through that we create an anti-displacement fund to fund some of the initiatives that are identified within that. A lot of progress has been made on that, and I'll talk about that. And then align, some of the research and the recommendations of that with the project itself and the milestones, including steps like the supplemental draft and the final SFEIS. And then create a policy agenda for anti-displacement that can be part of the legislative session, and that was successful this year, and now is in the implementation phase of that agenda. So the 2024 legislative session, I believe this has been provided as an update, but they created the Blue Line Extension Light Rail Transit Anti-Displacement Community Prosperity Program. I got to read all the words because that's what it is within the statute. Very specific about what their charge is. That is a new governance group that their focus is on, and $10 million was provided by the state general fund for this. The $10 million must be matched with a local match, dollar for dollar, or with a match as identified. The focus of that was set out in statute to focus on affordable housing, small business support, community ownership, and commercial community development around the corridor, enhancing the public realm, and job training and placement. So this is tied anti-displacement around the Blue Line Extension. And It had very specific tasks assigned to it. Chair Zelli was designed as the chair of the first meeting, and that meeting has occurred, and new chairs were selected, and they will be meeting 2 more times this summer, including tomorrow. Sam O'Connell is our representative within that group for the council. They're working on bylaws and other governance structures to set up our operations for that group. And so there'll be more to come on that group, but they have formed and they're meeting and is a charge of the outcome of the 2024 legislative session. In terms of their schedule, there's an anti-displacement coordinated action plan that will also be out for public feedback and input. That'll occur for public feedback and input right after the supplemental draft EIS public comment period. So we're separated those two. Currently, the draft is out for partner review from the community, cities, and the county and the council, because there's a lot of actions within there that are tied to those agencies, and they need to have input and feedback about how they're described within that. And then the meetings that I had mentioned, they're working on bylaws and funding and fundraising processes for allocating this funding. So there'll be future information about the community action plan. It's a detailed plan about actions and where the council can participate in that. We can bring back that to you. So cost ridership and federal rating, as I've mentioned before, when we released this March, we released cost and ridership and we presented to the council. We are following the FTA guidance on how to forecast ridership. We use what is called a STOPS model. It's a model that is used by all the property transit providers that are developing projects in the Capital Investment Grant Program. It's a model that kind of sets a level playing field for comparing all transit projects in the U.S. Because they're competing for funding, so they need to follow the same model and same FTA guidance. What has changed since the last time I provided ridership update is we've gotten more guidance from FTA. We will now just be basing our ridership forecast based on post-pandemic riderships. Before, ridership data was sort of a blend of pre-pandemic ridership and post-pandemic, and now we're just looking forward now, post-pandemic. So we've also updated. We now have new base data that incorporates 2023 ridership in our region. So some new data has entered the model and allowed us to provide an update. And the data we'll provide is for 2045. And so that's the year we'll be using as we seek federal funding. So our new ridership data, we anticipate ridership in the forecast year 2045 of 12,000 to 13,700 on the Blue Line extension. Of course, the day this project opens, it just becomes the Blue Line. So ridership overall on the Blue Line, anticipate over 30,000 riders per day. This will make Blue Line itself the second highest ridership line in the Metro Transit system, behind the Green Line. By then, the Green Line extension will also be open. So light rail remains our highest ridership type of route. And as is today, the Central Corridor Green Line has a higher ridership than Blue Line today, and it'll continue. Blue Line will be number 2, and Green Line will be the highest ridership. So that is the projected ridership. Since March, this is up about 500 rides. I think I forecasted the March update was 11,500 to 13,200. So the new data and new guidance from FTA has slightly increased our forecasted ridership based on what we presented to this council back in March. In terms of cost, we are now, back in March, I gave you a cost range of where we're at. In March, it was based on sort of the 30% or 15% design. We've advanced the design further, and so we can provide a new cost estimate. We are at 30% design, which means, there's a lot more design work to come. There's a lot of unknowns yet, and so we need a very large contingency when we have this much unknown. We are carrying a 37.5% contingency for this project. FTA has requirements about contingency and how much contingency you have based on where you're at in the design process. We are past 30% design. So right now, the FTA guidance would be that we have contingency of 33% or roughly, and we've decided to carry a higher contingency at this point. We just feel based on market uncertainty and other risks and just our knowledge of building light rail projects in our region that we would like to carry a higher contingency. So we are currently projecting a contingency of 37.5%, which is higher than FTA recommendation for the budget that we are presenting. And so our budget now, and we're moving away from a range because we do need to settle on an individual budget number as we enter in the federal funding process. And so we're currently at $3.2 billion. This is for the scope that we presented at the beginning here for 12 stations for 13.4 miles. So it's important to talk about what this number represents. It represents a very large contingency. So the $900 million contingency that you see here is a larger contingency than the cost of the central corridor. So we're holding contingency because of both uncertainty of the project, where we're at design, but we just feel we want to enter this next phase of the project. We haven't decided what the mitigation will be for the project yet. That will come through the supplemental final EIS. We know that's in contingency, but we don't know what that scope will be. We haven't asked the communities for municipal consent yet, and so the project definition may change based on that process. And so we feel it's important to have that large contingency. As you break down though, but if you look at that top number there, we'd be going out to procurement in 2026 with roughly a $1.4 billion procurement for construction of the project. Operating estimate, this just initial estimate here, this is all model-based, FTA model-based estimate. It'll get much more refined as we get into more detail about the hours and our staffing levels and salaries, but this is a model that we use for all our transitways for calculating O&M cost. I would probably say this should be more of a range at this point of $45 to $55 million in opening year, so 2031 or 2030. And so that's an estimate that we have currently for operating cost of the Blue Line extension. And this assumes 10-minute headways, so a frequent service. It assumes that long-term we will be returning our rail to 10-minute headways. From an FTE standpoint, we haven't done as much detail as we've done for the Green Line extension in terms of FTEs, but it's very similar in the number of vehicles we'll be operating, number of stations we'll be maintaining, the headways and the operations. So we think it's similar in terms of how many FTEs we would need for Green Line or compared to Green Line extension. So at this point, very early, we're saying 200 to 250 new positions for this segment of Blue Line extension. It's important to know whether your project will be eligible for federal funds. We're pretty good at projecting based on current federal guidance where we'd rate within the system. In order to receive federal funding, you must rate at medium or higher. Now, we just got new draft criteria from FTA, and so this is a rating based on that draft criteria. The final criteria is what we'll be actually rated on next year or the year after. But we anticipate we are a solid medium or higher for this project. With the new criteria and our new ridership, we are in a stronger position than we would have been back in March when we looked at this rating. So project definitely will be eligible for federal funding based on the current criteria or projected criteria. So just a little bit about where the ridership will come from. We are building this system like we are in a lot of our metro lines into both an existing market and new markets. And so the North Minneapolis segment of this and even the Robbinsdale segment is a very rich transit market today. So we'll get a lot of our ridership initially from that area. The northern portions of this it does not have strong local service today or connecting service. And so a lot of that ridership will come through Park and Ride or eventually through new connecting service that we develop or microtransit or other ones. But if you look at where the model forecasts, it's a stronger in Minneapolis and goes north. It's a different type of market. In terms of the model itself can predict how people will arrive at light rail. And so their station boardings, whether they walk to it, kiss and ride, park and ride, or they transfer from local network. So you see as you go further north, there's more park and ride arrivals, and that's where we're building our park and rides. We're not building any park and rides within the city of Minneapolis. So a lot of the Minneapolis connections will be for transfers or walk up or ride locations. In the northern ones, it'll be more park and rides. And that'll change over time as in the northern section, they develop more TOD and other development around the stations. So key takeaways from the ridership cost rating standpoint, that this remains eligible for the program. So that's strong. It's a strong project in terms of competitive. There isn't very many light rail projects in the pipeline at the FTA. There's 4, including this one. The other 3 are a minimum of $9 billion or higher. So from a price standpoint, it's competitive in that sense. But it's a very competitive pot of funding. And so our region is asking for, we have other projects that we're also competing in within that. So in that time frame, F line, Purple line, are projects that are in our pipeline too. So, there's no guarantee if you're eligible of how much funding you'll have or when you'll receive it, but we do believe it's a competitive project. I'll just point to the last bullet here too, is like who will ride. There's a lot of work going on around that, but there's a strong, if you look at the supplemental draft EIS, the information about demographics about this is a strong, outlaid in there, but there's a lot of rides that will come from people who don't own a car within this area. So it's a really strong service that we'd be providing for those that don't have other options within their home within this, so. A little bit about project risks. I think framing this, all these transitways have to create a risk register, and we are developing that this year. That's a big part of whether FTA funds this project, if you're managing your risks. The way to think about this project is much more similar to the Central Corridor Green Line. This is reconstruction in the urban or existing right-of-way. Is not anything like the Green Line extension in terms of construction, and so the risks are somewhat more known in that sense. We have no tunnels and we have no freight railroad risks currently in the design. And so it's more risks around right-of-way. There's a lot of right-of-way impacts in terms of small property, temporary easements. We do have to acquire some property. A tremendous amount of utilities, both old and new, are underneath these roads that we're building on. So a tremendous amount of utility-related risks. The environmental information is outlaid in the supplemental draft EIS. Anti-displacement has clearly been, the community has stated that is a key part of the success of this project, so we need to get that right. And just in terms of the construction, it's a construction type that the contractors are very familiar with building, but it's more of a marketplace risk. There's a lot of construction activity, so can we get competitive bids on this project is a key part of whether we can deliver the project within the budget. We're doing a lot of work to get multiple bids and competitive bids and make it a project that is attractive for people to bid on in terms of a good project to build. I want to talk a little bit about, we had some questions about where decisions are made in the project. There are a lot of places decisions are made, both on a transitway in general, but on this project in specific. I want to kind of break that down for you. The project team itself, we've created a new model for how project decisions are made here, sort of based on what we learned from Gold Line and have built into Purple Line, that it's really an integrated agency team. Hennepin County is the lead local funder here, is embedded in this project. The deputy project manager for this project is a Hennepin County employee. Hennepin County has key roles. They lead the anti-displacement function. They're involved in communication and they own the roadway this project is being built on. So they're the roadway authority. And so complete integrated team. MnDOT plays a strong role here. MnDOT leads the right-of-way process in here. And also with the 2024 legislative session, they've designed MnDOT to have some other roles within the project going forward. As you know from last year, when we were talking about this project, we created the Project Decision Board. This is made up of 3 county commissioners and 2 council members. This is where major key decisions will be made in addition to those decisions coming before the council too. They'll make decisions about scope, the actual budget. They'll be involved in the procurement type and giving a go-ahead to begin the procurement. And then as the project gets under construction, similar to ECCB, they're involved in approving change orders of a certain type. This is a new type of board that's evolved from the ECCB. The key part of the decision here is that for a major decision to be made, both parties, at least one member from both Hennepin County and the council, have to vote in the affirmative. And so there can be no decisions made without council support and county support. So that's I think, effective change. It is also now one that is being supported to be included in the purple line. We could see that be a potential action that the council really sees this model as a model going forward for major transways. I see that's a really positive change that is very different than how Green Line, for example, Green Line Extension or Central Corridor worked. We also have the Corridor Management Committee that, this is statutorily required Corridor Management Committee for light rail projects, but we find this such an effective board for projects like this that we have this on BRT projects also. They have recommended the route that is now moving forward. They've advised on many key items, and they're recommending, but I think we really want to go with this is made up of elected officials from each of the cities and the county. The Blue Line Coalition has members on here, the Minneapolis Park Board, Chair, Councilmember Chambliss is on this, is appointed, and we have, so it's a place where a lot of key decisions are also made, and we really want to make sure that CMC supports these key decisions as we move forward. And so a lot of important decisions get made by CMCs. Hennepin County, as we've talked about, they're the local funding partner, the roadway authority. For most of this route is on Hennepin County roads, and so they have a unique authority in that sense too, and the funding partner. So no matter what the federal share is, the Hennepin County is responsible for the local share. Met Council, we are the owner of this project in FTA's eyes, and after it is built, it's Met Council's property. We're the operator of this. All the procurements will be issued by Met Council, so there's a responsibility and accountability and oversight related to that. Each of the corridor cities, just so at the project level, we meet every week with each city. There's a issue resolution team, so every city, every issue is resolved on a weekly basis with their staff that has input from their policymakers. And so these cities and the county and the park board all have extensive input in the actual design of this project on a weekly basis. But they will have municipal consent authority that I'll talk about. And, once we build this, it's really the communities that ridership comes from how they develop their land use and develop around the stations. FTA will be the funder from the federal standpoint. They provide oversight. The community has been a core for us developing and where the route is and what the design is and what will be our mitigation for any environmental impacts. And then the last one, that board, which is kind of the new function of here. These other elements are often part of a project, but the Blue Line Extension Anti-Displacement Committee, Prosperity Board, is a new governance structure within this project too. So they have decision-making related to the project. Project delivery is going to be a major difference here related to past projects. The council now has more authority for different types of procurement than we have in the past. Green Line Extension, we could only do low bid or design build. Now with light rail, with new authority we have, we can do another type called best value contracting. And that is the likely procurement type we will do here with the council. That allows us to do both price and technical score in the evaluation of the winning bidder of this project. That requires us to rebuild our contract language for that new procurement type. Best value is a type of contracting that is very familiar to MnDOT and Hennepin County. It's an industry type that's used in a lot of large infrastructure projects. It'll be the first time for our council, though, using this. We see a lot of advantages. There's a lot of work we can do with the industry before we actually do the procurement that should lead to a better procurement. And then being able to score proposals, both price and technical score, should result in a better project also.
See, Nick, I'm worried because we're coming up on an hour.
Sure.
I think in terms of engagement, I think we've got a pretty good idea. You probably should touch on municipal consent process, what we don't know, and then anything else you think we don't know or need clarification, we can get into questions for some of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, because we maybe will get 40 to 45 minutes to discuss this, and we were going to allow for 25% of the meeting for a presentation. I know, though, it's a great presentation. I'm not discounting this, and I got to see it in the Transit Policy Work Group. It's important. It's the part where we can ask questions.
Agreed.
So on July 24th, we're going to be asking you for permission to have a public hearing for municipal consent. That'll start the municipal consent process, which is a state statutory process. The council's role in that is to have a public hearing, and then it's the 4 cities and Hennepin County to take action on municipal consent. They have 3 actions they can take. They can approve the design we submitted. They can take no action, which is also providing consent, or they can disapprove their design plans that we submit to the community. And if they disapprove, they must state what conditions the project could change, that if those changes are made, then that would turn into consent. So that's the next phase that we're starting if the council authorizes on July 24th, the public hearing. I'll skip over that. That municipal consent timeline requires each community to have their own public process. And so tentatively, these are some dates that are provided to us. We believe Minneapolis, each of these cities may change these dates based on which committees they want to go for. It's a process that they control. So I would say these dates will firm up later in July. But each city is expected to have some sort of public hearing and a vote within their community. Their votes must, if the council takes action as planned, this votes from the municipalities in the county, Hennepin County, must occur before October 10th. With that, we'll pause.
That is a lot. Thank you, Nick. I know we've taken more time for the presentation, but when you look at the richness of all this information, I know we've all looked at it, but every time I see a meeting or hear you, I actually learn something. Let's open it up, and I want to give everybody a chance to both ask questions or make a comment. We can follow up again, but let's hear from everybody first, and then we can kind of cycle back. I can look left and right. Deb, you're the chair of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for putting all this information out and compiling everything. I think it is important. I have a couple of really specific questions, but they tie to maybe things we've read about that I think would be good to get on the table. The first one is in the design section, the Minneapolis Transit Mall and the issue with utilities and the questions that have come up related to that. I think it would be good to present for the anti-displacement legislation. Does it define anywhere who is responsible for the local match, the city or the county? And then my other question is honestly on the municipal consent. What happens if one of the cities votes disapprove without providing recommendations?
Chair, council
Easy
members?
questions.
Yeah, let's start with the transit mall. Underneath the proposed transit mall is an XL transmission line within the public right-of-way that we determined we cannot build a light rail transit line over a transmission line. And so that line will need to be relocated if that is the route. The relocation of a transmission line is a public process also. They are there, though, as soon as the record of decision is issued, we have the right to issue that they must relocate. So they are there essentially by permit in a roadway, so they do need to relocate if we issue that order. XL's we've been coordinating with them strongly. We are doing some advanced work with them to get them ready so that they can relocate within the time frame that fits the construction schedule. But there's been no work done yet about where that rerouting would be, and that would be a process that is led by XL as a transmission line must follow a public process that they lead. But they've been a great partner in working with it so far, and we anticipate that it won't impact our project schedule based on what we've known so far. But we can't, until they know the more route and more details, that schedule is a little bit up in there, so. The second question was related to municipal consent.
The second one was the anti-displacement.
Oh, anti-displacement. So the state law said the $10 million must be matched, at least 1-for-1. It identified areas that match could come from. Just stated cities, county, Met Council, or private place.
Philanthropy.
It didn't require how the match be secured or who it is. So I think there's a lot of flexibility in that, but the money can't be spent unless a match is found. And so I anticipate that a lot of the work in finding matches will be initial charge, and that hasn't been identified yet. And there'll probably be multiple areas of matches that occur, so.
Mr. Chair, just on that point, if I may, and that 10 million, is that started in 2024 and goes through, is it per year or is
It's,
it the whole project?
Chair, Councilman, it's available now. It's $10 million total.
In total,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I suspect there would be potentially proposals for additional funding, but this is a one-time
Yep.
$10 million.
And the expiration on it is,
It doesn't expire.
okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may, and to clarify, in not this last legislative session, the prior one, there had been 50 million allocated by the legislature towards the blue line. The 10 million is advanced from the 40 million that was still the fat money.
And then, Chair, last question was on municipal consent, the three options. Our goal is to get municipal consent, but we will follow state statute on what action is taken. It's hard to act to change something if a city does not tell us what changes to be made. And so that's a situation we're not, as we've kind of said, we don't get into the hypotheticals because we're not sure what but we'll just follow the state statute on the next steps, depending on whatever the action is of the resolution of the county or any of the cities. So I think we'd come back to the project decision board and the council for an update and talk about what the steps are after such an action would occur, so.
And Mr. Chair, just to that point, can I add a quick one on that too? So thank you for that. I think that's been something that certainly the cities care about deeply and are very informed on, but also constituents, whatever their points of view are on this project, are paying attention to. And I will just call out Purple Line again when White Bear Lake decided to do an about face. And so we moved the route, but it's much easier to do that when they're at the end of the route rather than maybe in the middle of a route. But I do know that at a council meeting in this room, I asked about that, and it was said that if municipal consent isn't given, we might have to change the project or stop the project. But, that's not what I'm hearing, and I'm not trying to debate, because really I think the point of this law is so that when you're putting in major freeways and stuff for progress, you don't have one tiny town along the way. I know this as a city council member and a mayor for many years, right? You can't get too hung up, but it's very important that, we are very clear about what we tell our partners and the public on that. So I just wanted to make that point. And then also, as far as the timeline on municipal consent, it's starting this year. Is it a fact that Hennepin County wanted to start the project now because there's a clock that runs on it and it was decided it should go before the elections this fall? Who made the call to start the project, just curious, before elections in the fall?
Chair, Councilman, the project is ready for municipal consent, so I guess it's the council that will authorize the start of it. So that we don't start until the council takes an action. This council.
And I don't know if there are points.
And Hennepin County Regional Rail, it's a joint public hearing, so.
Okay, thank you for that. And I just think it's important, again, all politics aside, we have an election coming up. And I don't know who's all running these cities, I don't know. And I just learned a lot on Purple Line, and I think there was another community out there too that, and you just don't want to get yourself in a bind. So I had thought that if we do authorize municipal consent and continue on this timeline we've seen, maybe then we ask for ratification once the elections are over, that we know where the new group stands or the new people stand, so that we're not, getting ourselves into a bind after elections. That's just me thinking, because I just think these are long projects, and you can rationalize, and we've discussed at the Transit Policy Work Group that I think Hennepin County or others thought that maybe the group that's been shepherding this through for a while should be the one to make that decision. I will say there's been a lot of change on these councils over the past 14 years, and a lot of change to the project. But it will be the people that are coming into office, potentially again with elections down the line, that will be owning it. So that's just on municipal consent. I just wanted this group to really be thinking about the timing of that and how important it can be, to the outcome. Because again, I would never have thought of, I was reading about White Bear Lake before I think I got on the council here, so it's a big deal, though.
All right, I want to get to this side of the room. Just one comment. I think that when Nick said this is the timeline for municipal consent, that's the timing we're in. I'm not talking about the future. We can always have decisions in the future. It's my sense that this timing was not done in anticipation of a political outcome. It was just.
And Mr. Chair,
Yeah,
if
and
I
I know
may,
I know you're not saying that.
I just think it's bumping
Yeah.
so close up to one that we should be mindful.
Correct. Let's go with Chai.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Nick. I know that our work on the anti-displacement stuff is really pioneering, and so I don't know if that's being led by in-house staff or consulting, but when everything is said and done, I would recommend the staff to maybe do like put something on the website, do like a case study so that future governments, other governments across the country can learn from us, and that we can, because we're one of the first to do this really important work, and so that it would behoove us to make that public, to share with other and future governments. Thank you.
Thank you. Great thought.
Mr. Chair, just to
Yeah.
that, Councilmember, when we were out in DC, we met with the Brookings Institute, who is doing a case study of this in real time as the work is coming together. The FDA is also very much paying attention to this work because it does have implications on, as Nick mentioned, there are 3 other lines going on, massive amounts of investment, $9 billion or more for all these other light rail lines. These anti-displacement efforts here are being watched nationally, and so we'll definitely continue to do that and document it in the way you suggested.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's not lost, I think, on any of us and this administration. Tony, do you have a question?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this information today. It continues to fill in the gaps as we move forward. The chair had said, we know what we know today, we'll know more as we continue on. So thank you for the continuing information. I did want to ask with respect to the mitigation, anti-displacement and mitigation. You know, I think in some places we talk about mitigation as a part of the project, and then we talk about anti-displacement. And I am not exactly sure which has to be here and which has to be there. How do we understand that and reckon with what comes where, or what is needed to come where?
Chair, council member, I want to tread a little lightly here. So mitigation technically will be defined in the supplemental final EIS. And anticipate some of the mitigation items will be closely correlated to anti-displacement. I'm not saying what those items will be. That's the public process may generate some of the mitigation items. We do know that there are some items that have come through our anti-displacement work to date that are probably going to be outside of what would be eligible in a project. And so that, I think there'll be a series of items that are both mitigation items or parts of the project that are just clearly parts of the project. And then there'll be items that will be defined by this group or by cities in parallel to the project. And I just don't necessarily want to say which, I just know there'll be those 2 types. And until we get to the supplemental final EIS, I won't be able to define what those mitigation items, but we'll be working on what those items will be mitigation-wise over the next year and actually seeking input on those. And then that the new group will also be developing its plan for where they should invest in anti-displacement efforts that are separate from the project. And so kind of 2 parallel processes. So
And it's really important that we put our minds around that.
Yep.
I think Met Council, as council members, we should be aware that our primary responsibility is as the owner and manager of the project. And much of the anti-displacement work kind of resides in how the project is designed and how it's going forward. But so much of it that is community-based goes beyond the scope of the project. And that's why it's important for this has gotten support from the legislature in terms of general fund dollars, not from traditional transit sources, not the project budget, the general fund. And that this committee is led by community, and not by either Hennepin County or Met Council. So it is a partnership, but as we are kind of figuring this out, as we're building it, this will be not only studied by outsiders, but by ourselves. So we'll have more of an opportunity to hear as they organize, put their bylaws together, start thinking about the framework for grants that they'll be giving and fundraising that they'll be doing, how that'll all work.
Mr. Chair, just a follow-up,
Yeah.
please. I really appreciate that, and, as we said, we know what we know today, and we'll know more tomorrow as the project continues. I do think that at some point in time, we cannot be as prescriptive as we'd like to be, perhaps, because the project will have its responsibilities and acknowledge those. And there will be this place then where a negotiation will likely take place. But the clearer we can be about what the project will take responsibility for, I think the better for all. So at some point, and I know that there's some information there already about what mitigation is versus what some of the anti-displacement, clearer community required work may be. I know that there's documentation of some sort there, but it's not as clear to me right now as I would like us to be able to be. I don't know if everybody else would like to see us approaching some clarity around that. You have it in plan. I'd like to understand more quickly or sooner rather than later what that looks like.
Yeah, Chair, Councilmember, I think the first step in that is a coordinated action plan document that will be available to you probably starting in August. That really lays out kind of ideas and then potential responsibilities. And so I think that'll be initial answers to some of the things you're thinking about here, so that we know that will be available in August.
Thank you very much. Forward to it.
All right, just continuing. Peter, you've had your hand up.
Just sticking on the anti-displacement theme here, $10 million does seem like a great start, but nowhere near the couple dozen different recommendations through the anti-displacement work group. And you won't be able to answer this question, but I'm wondering, just in our dream world, like how much, if we really wanted to make a dent on all of these recommendations, which are all amazing, I mean, what are we talking about here? And are we talking 10 times that amount? Talking 200 million? I don't know. I mean, maybe the anti-displacement work group has thought about this. And I haven't seen it in the report, but talk to me about that.
Chair,
It's a
Councilmember.
great start, but it's just nowhere near what's actually.
I don't believe there's a number that's been put out there, but, there are elements that are funded also. Let's take an example. There's a workforce development, construction industry workforce development. There's some elements around that. Well, there are a lot of those programs out there that are funded. And so some of the efforts might be just getting people within that community into those programs that are funded. So there might, in some sense, 10 million, there is other funding that is also, that will align, that's already set out there. So that's part of what you got to remember too. And that's at all levels of government. There are programs that are very much aligned with anti-displacement priorities within that. And so I do believe that the starting point is actually larger than 10 million because of that.
Parallel efforts, yeah.
Yep.
Our RA might have an opinion on it.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Councilmember, I would, there's kind of two questions embedded in how this actually comes off sometimes. I think it's important to clarify them in our minds. One is a question of the magnitude of what the work could look like, right? The dollar amount. But I do think sometimes we talk about it all as though you have to create a fund for all of it. And there are a couple ways to get there, because you could also not collect certain revenues that could otherwise be realized on the back end of a project. So for example, since escalating rents are often one of the things that would be seen by many as what would be defined as gentrification or displacement related activities, cost of living, not collecting the full amount of that escalating rent is another way to get to the number without, you don't need a grant to do that. You need to say, we're okay taking less than the full amount of what otherwise that increase could look like, for example. And so you both can find sources, but it's also sometimes potentially working with partners to say, we're going to forego collections potentially in other ways, would be another way to think on. So I think it's got to be thought about on both sides, both the collection of money that can be expended on activities and not collecting money that otherwise increases cost to people concerned about displacement. I hope that helps make sense.
All right. Deb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment I want to, for Councilmember Carter, I think that is defining what's a project cost versus anti-displacement efforts is very critical. You talk about ways that this project could scope creep unintentionally, and that is something that could fall into that. So I think that is really, really critical. So I really appreciate you calling that out because I think that will matter as we're moving because the cost is already so high that we have to be very cognizant and keep our eyes open throughout this entire process. As you all know, I've had concerns about this project because of the cost and some of the ridership numbers, and we were holding out to wait for those numbers, and we have those numbers. I'm continuing to be concerned, and it's not about not building this or transit, it's building the right thing at the right time. You know, I just look at the high cost and the lower ridership than what we initially had with this project. You know, it gives me some angst with the whole project. I think that's fair, but I think it's also, you know, why we wanted to get the information out to have these conversations. It doesn't mean it's a yes or a no. I'd definitely be looking to our funding partner to be completely committed to funding their share throughout the duration of the project. But I do think that the more that we can talk about it as these big decisions are coming up, because there are big decisions coming up over the next few months. And so, you know, even if you have a question that comes up down the road as you go home tonight and you think about this some more, please reach out to Nick or Charlie or Ryan or myself, you know, to be able to, because like I said, big decisions coming, so we want to make sure everyone's fully informed. So thank you for this.
We're also going
Mr.
to
Chair.
add something that you're thinking, but I'm going to say it, which is that there are eligible expenses as part of the federal process.
Correct.
And there's expenses which are not eligible. And so that's not to say that the federal criteria rules everything for us, but it is something we can violate. Yeah.
Correct.
Mr.
Right.
Chair, just a point of clarification quickly. So it's a different project, but it's serving the same communities. But what was the original estimated ridership when we had the, you know, original plan? Just for comparison, we talk about the lower, I just don't even remember what the original numbers were. Does anyone
Do you
have that?
We can find out.
I believe it was around 26,000.
Okay, and I just, you know, we're trying to serve 4 communities, so I just, you know, and the world changed. So I think it's just important, though, to have along the timeline of where this project has gone, but what these estimates were as far as cost, and I think the cost was 1 point, whatever, I think we mentioned that earlier. So just information is good to know what's going on, and we know that with our own ridership too. So.
Right, all right, so now I'm back to the side of the table. I have just promised Sue Vento, Councilmember Vento is next, and followed by Wendy Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding anti-displacement, I have concerns as it relates to environmental justice, and there's likely a correlation between the two. It's my understanding that the FTA, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the FTA definition of environmental justice includes people with disabilities, but it doesn't include senior citizens. Is that correct?
Chair, Councilmember, we define that in
Helpline.
chapter, I'll look for
I'm
a
pretty
specific.
sure, I asked that question
Yeah.
when we had our transit policy meeting, and
I'll bring up my environmental expert just to make sure I get it right. This is an important question, and I don't want to misstate what we have in our document.
Welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. The environmental justice definition of the populations and communities under the new executive order allows us to consider additional parameters and considerations beyond or in addition to race and income when we look at identifying environmental justice communities. So that means that identifying senior populations is one consideration that we look to identify, particularly as it intersects with other identities and history of injustices and so forth. So that can be a consideration.
Thanks. I had asked a question during our transit policy work group meeting, and the explanation that I think it was Colin, I'm not sure, not Colin, somebody gave, was that FTA included disabilities but not age, and I had a concern about that. I would hope that when the legislature made this decision, they made it with the intent that the 10 million plus the match would include those two populations, much of whom are overlapping, growing populations. With the anti-displacement, whose responsibility is it to find the match?
Chair, Councilmember, so the group that was formed, that would be one of their charges. So, we're a member of that group, and so others are members, but, it's essentially, it's a multi-agency, multi-community effort for that effort, and, I know Hennepin County is being the lead as an agency in that too, so there's a lot of variety in that.
Is there a timeline tied to getting the match? Are you able to start
There's not a-
spending the 10 million before you've got?
No, you need to identify the match for each spend, so.
Okay. The other concern that I have, and I don't want to go all night, I can assure you of that, but I continue to be concerned about the process. And I've said this before, I will say it again briefly. This is like kicking the can down the road. If you're an observer of this process, you can't help but assume that this council is on board, ready to go with this project, because we continue to kick the can down the road. We continue to spend money. We continue to ask for money. And I feel for the people who have come here and have gone to their city council meetings and Hennepin County board meetings and other entities and express concerns because they never get a response from the decision makers. And I find that really troubling from a public policy, open government standpoint. When and where do those who have questions and concerns and in some cases objections get to be a part of a conversation about it? They can go to pop-ups and farmers markets and go to the information booths and have conversations with staff and volunteers, but when do they get to talk to the folks who are voting, doing the roll call votes? I continue to be really concerned about that. I am very concerned about the transparency, and it just feels like this is one major kick the can down the road. And I regret that I wasn't paying better attention when I first came on the council as it relates to this. And I regret that I wasn't asking questions and raising concerns earlier. Thank you. I hope that wasn't too much time.
No, that's right. Thank you. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if memory serves me, back when the central corridor was being constructed, you needed to have a medium-high rating in order to get federal funding. Have they lowered the threshold, or am I remembering wrong?
Chair, Councilmember, they needed a medium, and I believe Central Quarter was rated medium-high.
Okay.
So that level hasn't changed, but the rating criteria has evolved since then.
I find this whole process kind of frustrating as well, because everything is focused on getting the federal funding. The whole SDEIS process is all geared towards getting the federal funding. And I read through it, and it's basically checking the boxes so you can get to federal funding, but we don't ever get the opportunity to ask the big questions. I mean, since 2015 or before, it has been decided this is LRT. The question is, where's the route? And we've never gone back with all of the changes that we've had to say, well, what if it was BRT instead? And I really, really want to hear the answer to that question, but I don't know if we ever have a point in the process that we can ask it, because the ridership for this is comparable to a D-line ridership, I think. but $3 billion, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And so I would hope that at some point we can get past just looking for federal money and answer those bigger questions that have been not allowed to be asked basically since before 2015, to give us the information we really need on evaluating this.
On that point.
Deb?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your comment on that. I would say that it's a very, very valid question, and I agree, because some of these things, that map was drawn a long time ago. It's one of the things that I've been talking with the chair and the regional administrator about is we need to sit down and almost do a revision of that big map, a revisioning with this council. I think part of where some of the maybe push and pull with this project comes into play is a lot of you were not the people who voted to, that's the map. And so we need to do that. The hard thing is this project we're having to respond to ahead of having to do that evaluation. So the point is definitely taken. It's something we're working on. The challenging thing is this project's in a strange place on timing-wise that I don't know that that'll all be done before we're ready for that. I don't know. Do you want to add to that, Ryan?
Just here for that, all right, thank you for that.
Thanks, Mr. Chair and council members. Just to your point, there is a fundamental shift that happened in the region here with the funding coming from the legislature that positions the council differently moving forward than how it's been sometimes positioned in the past around its role in visioning transit development. And it still remains a partnership because, like, for this project, Hennepin County is identified as the non-federal partner with the match. And that brings a lot of pieces to it where I think when we have conversation here about where are questions getting asked, I think we have to both ask it around this table, but also how is that occurring within the county? Because I think they as electeds would also have strong feelings on how that is occurring in that world. And that matters as the one that has to figure out that non-federal share. This fall, we're going to be coming forward. We're working on it right now. I saw a draft a week and a half ago on a sales tax use policy that'll come before this body to talk about here's how we're proposing to bring policy forward that talks about what the next 30 years look like. So we build a system that is sustainable, that is defined, and that necessarily requires actually making sure you're thinking about what does the map look like, what's not in, what is in, it changes the posture from being one of kind of receiving through the TPP what comes in as the vision to one where we're both saying there should be some principles around transit development in the region, and we would like this body to be the holder of that. And it's always going to be a bit of a give, but I think to Councilmember Barber's point, this project does not fit neatly in the before or after bucket of that. It fits right in the middle of it. And I don't know what to do with that exactly other than say we're trying to honor the process that Nick laid out and where we're at, and we'll continue to do that. And hopefully we'll be able to learn more pieces as we go. But that's just a little bit of some other elements coming in to hopefully learn from where we've been. And in the future, you'll have a stronger rubric alongside the Transitway Advancement Policy and the TPP to really say this fits our regional vision well. And this body hopefully will be the holder of that. That's what we'd like to bring before you and discuss with you as we move forward.
Tony, yeah.
On that point, I really appreciate that question as well and would like to know how we step back and examine, but I know we're not the only ones in the world going through that. And I would ask that we ask, what's the FTA's sense of what is going on around transit planning with respect to these kinds of projects? Of course, we're looking at that federal funding, and they're looking across the country and seeing what we're seeing. They're not necessarily also stepping back. And so it's a question I'm sure that in the transportation industry, people are wrestling with, and perhaps we could get some information or even a presentation to help us as we step back. I'd like to ask about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Carter, so when we were with the FTA and we talked about the project, there's a lot of spots where they're not going to lead you to a place of decision making beyond the conversation you're having. But a couple of pieces have stood out, and as we've been working with Nick and the team and Metro Transit more generally, I would just point out this region is in an enviable place relative to its peers around the country because of the investments made at the Capitol by the legislature and the governor. And going forward, most systems right now are on life support, trying to figure out what the world looks like post-COVID funding and federal funds. That's not the conversation that I just was able to outline to you about. We're talking about a future and how do we build that out. That is point one. On the specific projects, my takeaway from having not been in those meetings but then being in them was the FTA is excited about the continued transit build out in this region generally, and about the projects that are continuing to show up, as Nick mentioned, through the criteria. And when you place it among the relative costs of some of the other projects that are all competing for the same buckets, it's not one of the highest cost rail-related projects right now in the country. They're just some really big projects. And I think it's the Seattle project. It comes in at $9 billion, and then you go up from there. And that gives a sense for kind of where we're sitting. So there's definitely remains a lot of interest and bullishness around transit, but that's true of the gold line, that's true of the purple line. It's not just the blue line extension.
And I have to, we're going to have an opportunity later this year, but I'm looking forward to this, not just stepping back, but looking at this whole transit vision, which isn't just a vision because now we actually have the ability to execute it. And so rather than think about one line, does that make sense? Really is talking about this interconnected system where transit and mobility can actually serve the multiple goals that we've been talking about. Wendy, quickly, and then then back to Judy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's still important to have the one line, does this make
Yeah.
sense conversation, because that's what led us down the path with all of the challenges that we've had on the Southwest Green Line extension. Because it was the same conversation. Wouldn't BRT be better? And Hennepin County saying, no, we only want the train. And sometimes we got to be the adults in the room and force the question to be discussed, because had we done Southwest as BRT, it would have cost $500 million and it would have been operating well before COVID instead of the situation that we're in now. I understand that Hennepin County has agreed to be the funder for whatever the overage is, but I look at the lost opportunities through the rest of the region by pushing these giant projects when you have a ridership that could easily be accommodated with BRT.
All right, Judy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And to the big picture, this is good news. I mean, we all know we've got money, we can plan it out. I would just say that I don't think anybody is looking at this in isolation, because it does connect. We've talked about it not just being, region-wide, but statewide. So there's definite impact. But, I just happen to have a perspective too, like you go through a pandemic and all the things, and everybody's having to rethink everything about their lives. Corporate offices are changing, how our workers are going. We all know the travel patterns have changed. And one of the questions I had asked in the Transit Policy Work Group to get to this meeting today was, what kinds of things do you want to see in this meeting? And because we are talking about our transitway advancement policy, what are the risks? So one of the questions I had, and maybe it's to the point being made about mode, because I don't think we should predetermine which mode it is, and I think the investment needs to be done in this part of the region. But, there was a premise of, HQ2 target, and there was a premise of downtown office and workers, and there was a premise of, people commuting to work, and everything has changed. And we are knowing, and I love downtown Minneapolis, downtown St. Paul, you can see what they're going through right now with their empty office spaces. But that was the foundation of what we were doing. People moving about to their jobs and to the places. And that's changed drastically. I don't know what the current numbers are, HQ2 target, but it's not what I think was projected. So I'm not trying to kill a project. I'm trying to advance projects here. And I just want to know, where was all the data looked at? Where was the moment where the partners or Hennepin County or somebody said, let's just make sure we're on the right path here? And I learned tonight probably missed it in our transit policy work group. I agree, you'll learn something every time you hear it. But if Brooklyn Park was about 90% done when they were on the BNSF line, and a lot of that is still about the same, which is good news for this project, but BNSF was nowhere going to give approval for that. And it just went on and on and on and on. And that was frustrating, I think, for some of us. I'm looking at Mr. Chair and others that we showed up here, and I knew BNSF wasn't going to go because I was involved at Greater MSP and Twin West, where all the lobbyists were hanging out with me. And I'm like, what is going on at Met Council in Hennepin County? So I'm just here to say, if it's kick the can or when do we look or whatever, you know, I'm glad for Brooklyn Park that at least as this line shifted, it's 90% there, but if the mode changes or should change, if anybody wants to have the conversation, you know, that money to this point has been spent to get it ready. And I just have to, you know, appreciate the fact that the project has gotten more expensive. I think it's now eclipsing Southwest, but it's probably less complex, which is good news. But there is a funding gap, and we hope FTA will come through. But if they don't, Hennepin County has agreed to pay the money, and that is great. But that's a big question for Hennepin County to have to answer. It's a big amount of money, and I don't envy them, you know, in that position if FTA doesn't come through. So I know they've got more money now because of the legislature last year. Our funding has been, you know, made whole to get us to, I think, the 85% that we want to get to now. But that's a big question as it relates to what I think we're talking about tonight is the advancement policy. We really need to know through this project that our funding partner will be there. And, you know, my position is I hope that, you know, another ask doesn't come to the Met Council like it did at least 2 times with Southwest. And, you know, we were in the headlines for all that because we had to do what we had to do. Tough decisions had to be made. But we have foresight in this one. And so I'm just hoping that, you know, if anything goes sideways at FTA and we find out in Q1 that maybe it's good news and maybe it's not, but there will be other ramifications if Hennepin County has to come up with their own money, because then that money won't go to other places in Hennepin County, I would presume, because it's got to be placed on the blue line. So that's a concern for me as it relates to our risk policy here, because there's a risk that we could, even though we've got our capital grant agreement and we've got the new decision boards and all of this, for anybody who wasn't around when we went through the Southwest stuff, that was because we ran into, you know, issues with Hennepin County. I understand they had a point of view and we had a point of view. There are no bad guys in this, but it's just when you find yourself in a tough situation, and Mr. Chair had to make some tough calls for this, and he, you know, took the heat. But let's not do that again, because that's a risk I am not willing to go into. And so that one, I think we should pay very close attention to. There might have been some work at during the last legislative session around this, and I don't think it ever got into a bill or a hearing, but there could be efforts next session that undo some funding or change funding, whatever it may be. So just know that nothing is permanent until it's in the ground and you've cut the ribbon and people are on the line. And I would also just say we should keep in mind those project risks when it comes to bids. That's a big deal. So, you know, we don't know it today, but we're incrementally getting information. But that will be, if there are not enough bidders out there and they're, you know, bidding up the project, we have to be very mindful of that. And I would also say, and I know we're working very hard, HR is doing a great job, project office, everybody here, everybody in Hennepin County has their heart in the right place, but we do have to be mindful that between Southwest and Blue Line, in the span of 5 years, 5.5 years, you know, we're gonna have to bring on approximately 500 more people. That's just in the field. We've got to make sure that back here at home in IS and HR, that we've got the people to support that. So it's not a total red flag for me, but these are the things that we can control here in our decisions, because that's what the advancement policy was set forth on. So I'll stop at that, but, you know, I think we can look at a lot of things, but we should really try to make sure we don't get ourselves to where we were with Southwest. And I do think that it'd be super great if we could just take a step back and look at the economic impact and ridership and all of the economic development things that were, you know, back in the day to where we are actually now with the numbers that we've put out, so.
Thank you, Judy, and I would just second the notion that we are in a different place, and no, I do not want to go back to that spot. I think we've not only learned, but we've implemented a lot of controls, and we will not ever want to put ourselves in a position where we're forced to make hard decisions that we were not part of originally. And I think we are now setting ourselves up with our eyes open. The other thing to say when I'm talking about taking the big picture, we do this one line at a time. So absolutely, we have to make some very thoughtful and key decisions that have implications to our ultimate purpose. So we're not here today to totally resolve that, but to introduce the questions that we as a council will be facing. It currently is a light rail project. That's the one that came before any of us were here, to be honest, except for Wendy. It's your fault. All right, you're wonderfully holding your hand up. Go ahead,
I just have a
Councilmember.
really quick question, Mr. Chair. If the FTA doesn't renew what number they're going to fund, what is the number from way back?
1 point.
The question is the FTA which can review and adjust its funding commitment because it was pre this new alignment. They understand that, we've met with them, but they haven't indicated that they would increase to 49, 51%, whatever that is. So that's just something that would be important for us, and I would suggest our funding partners would want to know.
Sure, Barbara knows.
Mr. Chair, the original project budget was for Blue Line 1.0 was $1.5 billion. So take about half of that, so 750 million.
Yeah. Susan,
Thank you, Mr.
Councilmember.
Chair. Councilmember Carter, in response to your question about the FTA and any recommendations they have, I recall a year ago in April, when the FTA administrator came with that wonderful check for the gold line at the Union Depot, that in a briefing with a number of folks prior to that event, she talked about the advantages of BRT. And part of what she talked about in her reasoning was the fact that if a decision is made to relocate or change the route in some fashion, it's not as costly as dealing with the permanency of LRT. So I wanted to note that. The other thing that I think we need to realize is that we represent a 7-county region. And a number of us represent communities and townships that are desperate for transit options and are getting nothing. And many of them are working to step up as far as development and building out their communities, and the support system they need that includes transit isn't coming along very fast, if at all. In many cases, they had transit, they lost it as a result of COVID, and they're struggling to get it back up to where it was. So we've got some folks that are pretty frustrated with the resources that go to one county as opposed to the other 5 for sure and maybe 6.
Okay, Dolkar, you've been holding your hand up. Did you have anything?
Oh, sorry.
No, oh, okay.
I led him down that road. I thought you had raised it, sorry.
I'm very attentive. Go ahead. Councilman Rosman.
Well, thank you very much. We talk about the key risks that we have this project. And there is a list over here, including the project funding and design and environmental. But my opinion is the most important key risk that we're gonna have is the anti-displacement, how we can manage that thing. Not only for this project, but even the coming projects. And each community they have, and each community or each neighborhood has different needs. So their input will be very important when we forming the mitigation and tools for the anti-displacement. That's my opinion. And thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate that because underneath the anti-displacement, and something we don't talk about a lot, but these projects, these large mega project transitways, come with tremendous economic benefits. And those economic benefits come to a point where it could drive and make unaffordable for existing residents, existing businesses. So we have to kind of state that out loud sometimes. Because if these projects had no effect, there wouldn't be displacement. So what we have to do is build on the assets of a community and not lose that community. And I think that's the tricky and important part. And I think that we've experienced that, some of that on University Avenue and the Green Line, certainly in the Blue Line. And then when you look at the nearly $3 billion of actual permitted developments along the Green Line extension, it's quite extraordinary. And that's why a lot of those mayors along that line are so committed to this large light rail project, because it has transformed in many ways, and in many good ways, but with our eyes open, what would happen when we go to North Minneapolis, Robbinsdale, Crystal, Robbinsdale, what is that kind of level of investment? How would that affect community? And so we can't lose the idea that the world is different. Downtowns are different. We don't have the office workers. But also 20 years ago, when I started kind of whining about transit, we had maybe 15,000 residents in downtown Minneapolis. Now it's what, 40, 45? And that's increasing. We hadn't really envisioned that. We hadn't envisioned that transit that comes with a frequency of every 10 minutes isn't about getting the express train to downtown. It's about the relationship between communities and the spread of kind of moving around, living your life around the metro that isn't a long express to your job. It is going to the grocery store, it's going to church, it's living your life without a car. Transit's different. We're building something for that different world. And I think in many cases, we have to be open and thoughtful, not necessarily say, because this is different, it's now doesn't make sense. It actually makes sense, in my belief, but in a very different way, and we have to be thinking about that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your comments on that, because you do see, even in all of our transit ridership post-COVID, that the way people are riding is different. They're riding, we used to have a morning peak and an PM peak, and now it's usually kind of late morning. People maybe work at home for a couple hours, go out and run errands, or they're going to doctor's offices or visits or different things. Like, you can see the trends changing, and you see that that change in the trend is holding. And so to me, it's how, like, if it's not this project, it is whatever is fast and frequent and gets people in these communities to places that matter to them. And, that is what I think we all have to reflect back on as, regardless of the project. Like, this is project agnostic, right? Like, but that is our goal. That is what we want, is to be able to move people around in the most efficient, effective manner to get them to destinations where they want to be. And I think that's when we talk about this revisioning. I mean, we have a really unique opportunity. I have talked to some of the other transit agencies across the country. We have a place where we do have a funding source. And so it is right now really to be asking these tough questions on this project and on all the projects. There are nuances to how we have to make decisions right now because of timing of some of the projects, but it is really the conversation to be having, because we really have a chance to leave a mark of what a really connected transit system looks like.
Jude.
And just briefly, Mr. Chair, thank you for your comments. Thank you, Deb, for yours, everybody. I also just want to note that we've got very nervous businesses along this line. The West Broadway Business Association has come here and expressed their concerns, and they're still opposed. The Robbinsdale Business Alliance is opposed. And it's not just on these big projects, because I was in Uptown this weekend, and man, oh man, it's just a you-know-what show going on there. And I know those roads and everything will be beautiful when they're done, but those businesses really have to adjust and hang in there, and some of them just won't make it. And we saw that on University, and it might just be the peril that happens, for progress, but at the same time, they're real lives and real people that up their stake in their businesses. And then I was at 50th in France, same situation, and I used to be the executive director there, and it's just a nightmare. So again, good projects coming in, working with the county, but they're not even Blue Line. And I know Councilmember Vento has mentioned the Gold Line and the signs that are like businesses this way and businesses that way, and how do you get there? So we just have to really appreciate those that are hanging on out there, and then when they see a project coming at them, kind of know from experience what they could be facing. So when we do talk about anti-displacement, and I know that businesses are part of that, But we really have to be mindful of what just even lack of traffic, will mean for them. So because I work at a Chamber of Commerce, I had to just put a plug in for the business community on this too. I know they're nervous. I know it'll be a huge impact. Some won't survive, some will. New businesses will come in though afterwards. That's a fact. But it's hard for them. And I just want people to, it's about the people who live there that own the businesses, but it's about people from all over that come to those businesses, because some of our communities don't have a lot of options where they want to grocery shop, where they want to get their medications, where they want to visit a doctor, where they want to do their, whatever they want to do. So that is another thing that keeps me up at night on all of our projects and this one as well.
And since you keep reminding me of something, Trudy, thank you for that comment. And also to know that our commitment to anti-displacement and frankly, inclusive economic prosperity development. Now we're having a year, we're putting together our regional development guide. It's not about one line or one county. I mean, this has to be a philosophy for all of our work and all of our projects.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
It's just going to let you know that as of February of this year, the residential population of downtown Minneapolis is 58,409.
Yes, sir. Nicely done, yes. That's the largest neighborhood, I believe, in Minneapolis.
It's doing just fine, and some of the entertainment is doing well. It's interesting. Yeah. All right, it is 6:02. I'm willing to stay another 4 minutes if anybody has any questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a final comment, it has nothing to do with this. So we had this meeting tonight in place of the Transportation Committee, and we decided to have it at Robert Street because we figured it would be easier. So Transportation Committee, we go to Haywood for the second half of the year. So the next Transportation Committee meeting will be at Haywood, not here. So please, we'll send an extra reminder. I always lose one or two, but even if Becky tries, Liz, during the transition. So
Thank you, Becky.
just everyone, please try to remember it's at Haywood.
Right, and I want to, this is a committee of the whole, but thank you, Becky, for being the recording secretary. Really appreciate it. This has always been a changing, we're going to settle down, but it's great to see you here. Any other last thoughts, comments from anybody? All right.
Mr. Chair, as a capstone, we appreciate the conversation. Thank you, Nick and team, for preparing all the information. We know you've been asking for it for a while, and I think it's important to view this as not as a one-shot piece, but one of multiple pieces, and hopefully you can see some of those timelines as they come up. There are clearly key questions. We didn't talk about the idea that there's a federal election this year, which shapes the FTA.
Yes,
I mean,
yes, indeed.
I think it's an important thing to also remember in the context of all of this, that depending upon November, it definitely changes the contours of projects in pipelines. But more importantly, I want to give voice to all the staff across Metro Transit and MTS who are working right now on trying to do about 5 years of work around this visioning pieces to prepare for conversations to arm this body with starting in the fall. Going into the next legislative session, we want to have a strong vision that explains where this organization stands and what it is building out and what it can do with the resources that have been provided to it. And so it might feel a little scattered right now for where you're at, but just know behind the scenes, every single week, there's a lot happening to build to that. And tonight was one of those steps. And I appreciate the chair of the Transportation Committee and the chair as well for helping to guide some of that as we're doing it and trying to bring it all together. So thank you all for that, and just know more to come. And we really do appreciate your thoughts and comments this evening.
And thanks, Nick, Kelsey, your whole team. Really appreciate the presentation. Thank you all. This is an exciting time to be on that council,
Well,
I
that's
think.
another word for it. Yeah, it's exciting.
And with that, this is a start, not the end, but this meeting is adjourned.